Hey, welcome to One Question with Pastor Adam. And I'm Adam, and I am pastor to believers and to doubters, to unfaithful Christians and faithful atheists. And friends, Jesus was not afraid of questions, and neither are we here at One Question with Pastor Adam. So, I was like, let's do a weekly show. And then some Thursdays I got nothing. So the last two Thursdays I've had, that's not exactly true. Allow me to do a little bit of virtue signaling right now. Last Thursday I didn't make it because there was a county commissioners meeting in the county where Clackamas United Church of Christ is, and it was about how to deal with the homeless crisis in the Portland area. And really, like, throughout the United States, throughout the world, we're dealing with homeless crisis. And so I went and talked about how Jesus, God, loves our homeless siblings. Did you know that it actually costs us more to have people living on the streets than to house people? Like, economically, it just makes a lot of sense to ensure that all humans have housing. Economically, it costs us more. So, and if you want to get into like the, Jesus-y stuff that we should love people, that matters too. That's a great deal too. So that's where I was last week. And so if you're the praying type, would love some prayers. There's some, people who are like not in my backyard folk, and it's understandable. But the other thing is that as we're researching these ways of housing our houseless neighbors, the crime rate goes down in these neighborhoods. There are all kinds of reason to house our houseless neighbors. Practical reasons, economic reasons, spiritual reasons, even love. Okay. All right. Yes, let's do this. So that's where I was last week. So thank you for coming back. And we have a special guest here today. I am excited to have Jonathan Foster with us today. The Reverend Dr. Jonathan Foster just got his doctorate. So we're going to give him 3 cheers when he comes on here. So Jonathan is an award-winning author and a creativepreneur. We're going to talk with him about that word. I love that word. Creativepreneur who exegetes culture and theology from Mimetic Theory and Open and Relational Framework. Those are a lot of words right there. And we're going to talk with Jonathan about those words. He co-founded lovehaiti.org along with his oldest son and has recently completed his doctoral work through Northwind Seminary. We've had Tom Ord on the show before. Tom is also a good friend of the show. And so Tom is at Northwind Seminary, and Jonathan worked with Tom. And I'm excited to talk with Jonathan about open and relational theology and mimetic theory through his brand new book, Theology of Consent. Mimetic Theory in an Open and Relational Universe. So this book, along with Jonathan's other books, do a lot of deconstruction and reconstruction of harmful theology that I've found harmful, and reconstructs into something much more beautiful. So let's get on with it. If you have comments or questions and you're watching the live show, please feel free to put those in the chat section. And I'm going to bring the Reverend Dr. Jonathan in right now. Here we go. All right.
Hey.
Hello, my friend. 3 cheers. Congratulations on the doctorate.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I will take it and run with it. So appreciate that.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming on the show. It is great to have you here. We have talked before, and I am excited about your work. And you are the author of multiple books. We are going to talk about Theology of Consent today. But I finished Theology and Consent and was like, I need some more Jonathan Foster. So I got The Reconstructionist on my Kindle.
Nice.
Here it is right here. And I'm about 30 pages into it. So I love the subtitle. You are very creative. I love it. It's got people, and then the caret that I've only seen in math.
That's right. Greater than.
People over text, mercy over sacrifice, and love over fear, and it's greater than.
Greater
It's
than.
not over. Like my sophomore in high school math teacher is yelling at me right now. But so you have the greater than sign. So can you tell us a little bit about the Reconstructionist? Because I love, like, we're in this phase of deconstructing, but what do you do
Yeah.
after you've deconstructed? How do you reconstruct something a little more healthy? And that seems to be one of your main projects.
Yeah, it turns out that it is. I mean, I didn't necessarily set out for that to happen, but for sure with that book, and it's pretty small. It's not as long a read as Theology of Consent. But yeah, that was the idea. It's like, hey, a lot of us are deconstructing, and rightly so. And it's okay if you want to just burn the thing down. I mean, it's not okay, but it is okay.
Yeah.
For one thing, I mean, I haven't maybe been hurt like some people have, and so I totally think that I give consent to people to do whatever they need to do. However, for those of us who are interested in reconstructing, I started realizing that all of my journey, I really could filter through those three things that you just mentioned. Mercy is greater than sacrifice, people are greater than rules or the text, and love's greater than fear. And when I started all my questions filtering through those three things, I realized I was coming out the other end with something that I could actually reconstruct. So I didn't feel compelled to necessarily throw the whole thing away. I threw a lot of stuff away, but was able to reconstruct. And I think honestly, a lot of people really want that. They just don't know how to get there. And so I hope the book might help them do that a little bit.
It's interesting because I'm finding that there is something within people as they do the deconstruction process that just says no to this harmful theology stuff. There's something inside of them that implicitly they know that this is wrong. And if there is a God worth believing in, it has to be a God of love. Like they know this, but as you say, like, where's the scaffolding? Where's the structure? And you do a beautiful job of providing that scaffolding and structure in your books. So highly recommend Reconstructionist and what we're going to be talking about today, Theology of Consent. You in this book, you go after, is that fair to say, traditional theology, classic theology, and one of the main theological aspects of classical theology that you go back to frequently is the God, the all-powerful God who is all-powerful. Is that how you phrase it? Something
Yeah,
like
because
that.
redundancy is important here. That the
Yes.
all-powerful God who is powerful. That's right.
Yes.
And make sure you say it in capitalized letters. And
Yes.
yeah,
Yes. Tell us a little bit about the all-powerful God who is all-powerful, capitalized all over the place,
that's right.
and why that all-powerful God is harmful.
Right. Well, first of all, I didn't set out to go out after anyone.
Mhm.
I really set out because I had a lot of questions about, first of all, mimetic theory, Rene Girard stuff, which I know you're intimately familiar with. It's been super helpful for me. And I wanted to take some of those insights and see how they might like fit into an open and relational theological framework, or the other way around. ORT fits into mimesis, and I think I kind of do both throughout the work. So that was the real thing, and underneath all of that was just trying to excavate the depth of beauty and love that I've discovered in the world and in my life, along with the pain. Like that piece of it never ceases to amaze me. It seems like joy and woundedness, pain and beauty are all like wrapped up together, and I'm still trying to figure that out. So it was kind of combination. That was kind of the foundation, and then it was mimesis and ORT on top, trying to put those together and see what happens, which was very interesting. So to answer your question, um, yeah, what I kept discovering, and if there are any open and relational, like process influenced open and relational people out there, this won't surprise them.
Mm.
But what I kept discovering was, oh my Lord, we've put all our eggs in the capital O omnipotent basket.
Yeah.
This all powerful God of power who steps outside of space and time, who really, when you break it down, the Western Christianity, what they've given to us is this idea that he cannot be influenced, he can't really be impacted. If bad things happen, he kind of I don't know, he approximates feelings of being bad, but it's okay because he's got it all controlled. He's got it figured out. You know, in the athletic world, you might say next man up. You know,
Mhm.
someone gets hurt, next man up. It's no big deal to God. I've literally heard, you know, preachers and quote unquote theologians tell me that over the years in a variety of different settings. So yeah, open relational theology goes a different way, thank God. And I think also a more biblical way. And it
Mm.
begins to unpack how no, God can be influenced, and God is not, like the classical word is impassible. So God is passable. And he's not controlling things. Like I don't even like controlling people. I don't know
Mm.
why I would like a controlling deity, you know? So, yeah, it's those kinds of things. And just the more it just kept coming up in the writing, like it kept resurfacing over and over. And I've thought many times, like, if we could just do away with that, and it would take a lot of pressure off, and
Mm.
realize that we live in a relational cosmos and that God is still very much active. The idea of the divine is still this, it's an idea that has all this veracity and strength and power, but it's a different kind of power than we've been conditioned to think.
Yes, I love it. And hi, Amber. Good to see you, friends. If you have comments or questions, feel free to put those in the chat section. Anything that you are deconstructing and want to possibly reconstruct, you can put that in the chat section. And Jonathan and I would love to talk about that too. One of let's talk about the title of your book, Theology of Consent.
Let's talk
What
about that.
let's just go straight to the heart of it. What do you mean by a theology of consent? I mean, you've been talking about the all-powerful God of power who isn't very consenting, but is just controlling. So, what are you trying to reconstruct here with a theology of consent?
Yeah, the capital O omnipotent God that we inherited, um, for the most part, most of us, it's like anti-consensual.
Mhm.
There's no consent to it. It's God is going to figure out a way to work and control, and you know, different subgroups of theological, you know, families will try to work that out and still try to give free will to people. And some people do it a little bit better than others, maybe a little bit more healthier than others. But at the end of the day, I feel like, yeah, I think that the best thing we could probably say of God is, and probably the truest thing, is that God is love. And the fundamental characteristic of love is consent. It's this commitment to not have to be in control, it's this commitment to not have to dominate. Um, I remember thinking, meditating, reflecting upon Mother Mary
Mm.
and that whole story. Now, I grew up in a very evangelical Protestant setting. You know, the estimation of Mary wasn't real high in our setting. It's not like we didn't like her, but it, you know, we had to make sure we, you know, there was demarcation between us and the Catholics, so we couldn't
Yes.
get carried away or anything. So it's a little embarrassing to say that I probably didn't reflect upon that as much until I got older. But even especially in the last couple of years, and think about how bad the story would have been
Mm.
if we didn't have that one little phrase. And it's not even a large section of scripture, but it's that one little phrase where Mary says, "Let it be."
Yeah.
If Mary doesn't say "Let it be," then what we have is a God who, I mean, it's an abhorrent picture, who in this case sexually dominates this young teenage woman. Okay, that's the last kind of
Right.
God that any of us have ever needed, and especially now, we you know, we don't need that any longer.
Right.
So I was thinking about, holy cow, Mary as this tiny, I assume she's tiny, I don't know, maybe she was a large
Sure.
teenager. Mary as this lone, you know, Hebrew woman in the outskirts of the Middle East a couple thousand years ago, she becomes the fulcrum of something so large. And it's all about consent. If she doesn't consent to what God wants to do, I don't think it happens.
Hmm.
So it's all that kind of stuff that begins to disassemble the way we've typically approached this. And I'm wrestling with all this. I personally have had massively intense, challenging, painful loss in my life.
Mm.
And it's caused me to like wrestle. Like that's not even a strong enough word with, well, if God is in control, what is going on here? And so that, you know, factors into all of it. So there's a lot packed in there, and I'm rambling, but I think consent is a really, really powerful concept and a really important, pertinent thing for our day and age.
Would you say that God is not in control?
I think God's out of control.
God's out of control. What is the point of having an out of control God?
That's a great question. I said that a little bit tongue in cheek.
I love it. I love it.
I do too.
Yeah.
What we don't have a God who's, here's what I think. I'm sure there are some tuning in who might think differently, and I don't mean to be disrespectful of them or their tradition, because frankly, all of us humans are meaning-making creatures. We're trying to figure out meaning in life, and some of us have gone through really difficult things, and the way that we're coping is through an older paradigm. So please just, give me a little bit of space and grace, and you can decide later if you don't like it. But yeah, I don't think God is in control. I think God is with us. So the classic theistic view is that God, can step in at any moment and has stepped in at times and fixes things or orders things, but then, withdraws, pulls away. And, that begs all kinds of questions, like what is going on with all the pain and difficulty in the world, and where is God if he can fix this? I mean, there's been so many bad things that have happened. So, it's these theodicy questions and these questions of evil that lead us down this path. But what I think is that there's more power in the patient, substantive witness of God than there is this idea that God lives outside of space and time in a hierarchical kind of steps down and fix things kind of way. It's kind of like, with us and our kids, you can do everything for them, but after a while, it's pointless. First of all, because you realize, I mean, I don't know about you or listeners. I mean, we had 3 kids, and by the time each of them were about 3 weeks old, I realized I couldn't get them to do anything, Certainly by the time they were 18 months old. I mean, they're their own little people, but that's the way it should be, So you have to consent as a parent to what's going on and to figure out a different kind of power. And so what I talk a lot about in the book, what Open and Relational Theology talks a lot about is the witness power. It's a relational power over against an authoritative power. It's the difference between, I think I say somewhere in the writing, like considering an aircraft carrier or considering the love I have for my daughter. Like the aircraft carrier is this massive symbol of authoritative, hierarchical, top-down pyramid power. My relationship with my daughter is something completely different. But what's more sustainable? What's going to last longer? What will break walls down? Well, obviously we know the aircraft carrier can break some walls down, but nothing will do it like love. Nothing will do it like relational power. And so it's that whole reorganizing. So what good is a God that's out of control? It does more good than a God who's in control. I think God in control just means we're all robots, and I don't think that that's what love is interested in.
Yeah, there's a God who oftentimes when we talk about the omnipotence of God, God is all powerful. It almost comes off as like God is this ultimate rageaholic. That you never know if God is going to be happy with you or angry at you, and this leads to kind of like this view of sacrifice that you go after, that you discuss using mimetic theory. So I wanted to get into mimetic theory a little bit. Your subtitle, Mimetic Theory in an Open and Relational Universe. Our viewers have heard a little bit about mimetic theory because you and I share a passion for it. But what does mimetic theory mean to you? How is it helpful in building this and reconstructing a helpful theology?
Yeah, so I got into Rene Girard's stuff probably in about 2015. I can't remember who introduced me to it, but we had just gone through really tragic stuff with our family. And at that point, and it's a little embarrassing to say that I hadn't landed yet on what I really thought about atonement and crucifixion and Golgotha and all the stuff that took place there. But I kind of really hadn't, and that's part of that's just because I was pretty deep in evangelical world, and you don't. I mean, it's a pretty standard answer, you know, in that world. So my questions were about, you know, the tragedy in my life kept leading me back to my questions about Jesus. And I think any of us who are interested in Jesus, I think it's a symbiotic kind of a thing. Like the pain that we feel eventually probably will ask, well, why did Jesus have to feel pain? And so I would start to say the first time, probably not the first time, but that was a very vulnerable time. I was very open to new ideas, because basically for me and my wife, all bets were off at that point. We were like, it doesn't really matter what anyone thinks. I want to know what's the most sustainable way to think of God and people moving forward. And so I landed on scapegoating mechanism and Girardi stuff, and it just gave me a really intelligent, healthy, different insight that I had never pondered before, and it gave me an understanding of why Jesus had to die. And the reason Jesus had to die was because we killed him. That's it. You know, it wasn't because there was any metaphysical need or that love. I mean, think about how absurd that is anyhow, that love would need bloodshed. Doesn't even make sense. I mean, I've never once had any of my kids come to me and ask for forgiveness and me go, well, time out. Let me go get one of my other kids and beat them before I can give you forgiveness. And so, so Mimetic Theory gave me a way to see the scapegoating mechanism and how Jesus voluntarily entered into that of his own consent. I don't think he was forced to by God. I think love invited him. And so Jesus even says, you know, I have the power to lay my life down and pick it back up. I'm paraphrasing. But it's those kinds of things that once you begin to see that, and you have to kind of read between the lines a little bit because of the way that, or at least for me, the way I was conditioned. But once you see that stuff really, really stands out, and it's a really beautiful thing. So I slightly forget your question. How does Mimetic Theory? It's just given me really good handles. Like, you know, Girard doesn't necessarily talk about consent, but although Girard was a big Simone Weil fan, and Simone Weil has an essay I found out late in this project called The Theology of Consent. By the way, that's why I just named mine Theology of Consent, because if you want the Theology of Consent, you should read Miss Simone. So she talks about consent, and Girard and some of his colleagues definitely read a lot of and pondered, reflected upon Simone Weil. So he may not have used the word, or maybe he did, but it definitely brings new insight into Mimetic Theory and vice versa.
Yeah, good. Jenny says, let's see if we can put this on here. Nope, it's too much. Jenny says, this powerful conversation resonated a lot with me as a social type of anarchist. I love it. Okay. Horizontal power through love and working together does so much more than from the top down power. And since watching sermons and podcasts in the last couple of years has really deepened my relationship so much with my anarchism, because I see so much of what I believe in Jesus preached this way.
All right, Jenny.
I love it, Jenny. I don't know if you have a response to that, Jonathan.
Well, my response is we should probably be talking to Jenny. Sounds like she knows it better than I do. No, that's really cool. And how can you not? Well, for some of us that our eyes have been opened a little bit, it's easy to say, how can you not see Jesus as being this subversive person of, you know, an anarchy becomes this thing that becomes esteemed. Of course, for a lot of people in our world, you know, they don't see that. So this becomes a really scary message for them. But I love what Jenny says.
You do talk a lot about horizontal power, this kind of idea of the top down power, which is where Jenny's getting the all powerful God from, who's up above us. But God comes to us horizontally through. I mean, Jesus, for Christians, Jesus shows us, our sibling, comes to us as one of us. This self-emptying that God does in order to become human, to show us that God would rather serve than be served, right? I
Mm.
mean, this is like the total transformation that feels very chaotic, anarchist, if you will, with using Jenny's language.
Right.
This is like a total transformation of our understanding of God that Jesus is giving us, and you are tapping into it so beautifully in your books. And I find it more important now than ever as we have movements within the United States that are like Christian nationalism, that are based on the all-powerful God of power, that are based on domination. I read a book as I was reading yours called Christian Nationalism, A Biblical Guide to Taking Dominion and Discipling Nations. It's apparently one of Amazon's best sellers. And their favorite word in that book is dominion. They never once use the word serve like Jesus does, right? So these are kind of scary times, and your books are a good antidote to them. And so I wanted to highlight that too. Like,
Thank you.
I know that you don't like to go after people, and we probably shouldn't go after people, but it's such important work that you're doing. So
No, I appreciate that. And one thing I was thinking while you're talking about that was this strange thing that's happened in America where, and in the West, where we've been taught that it's biblical to think about some of those things like dominion and that kind of stuff. So what I've loved about both mimetic theory and open relational theology is that it's given me, I think, a healthier biblical way to read some of this stuff. And so, because a lot of times the pushback many of us get, well, I'm just trying to be biblical or stay true to the word. Well, in reality, well, first of all, there's probably a whole bunch of problems with all that because we
yeah,
all bring our own presuppositions to
good.
everything that we read. So that's a big deal. But then beyond that is the reality is, I think this is a more biblical way to approach it. So hopefully things like theology of consent can worm its way into all that other dominion stuff because that is a dead end, man.
Yeah,
Well, it's a
it's just
explosive dead end.
yes, it's dangerous.
Mhm.
As Amber says, I saw that book. Eek, so scary. Yes. Hi, Michael. Good to see you, my friend. I owe you an email, so it's good to see you. And friends, if you've got questions or comments for Jonathan here, put those in the chat section, and we will get them in. Talk a little bit more. We've done the mimetic theory, a little 101. Talk a little bit about open and relational theology. Where does this come from? What is it? What is the goal? What is it trying to do?
Yeah, this is such good stuff. So a lot of times I'll start with the relational part to begin to unpack it because what open and relational theology is committed to, it's influenced by a guy by the name of Alfred North Whitehead and process theology. And it's so funny looking back on my life growing up, whenever that word process came up, um, I looking back, I see everyone like responding to it. It was like anathema to, which after a while, when a lot of people keep reacting the same way, that's a good indication. There's probably something going on here I need to check out.
Mm-hmm.
But so it's committed to this idea, a scientific idea, by the way. It's not something we're making up. That the cosmos is relational at the deepest levels, connected, entangled. It's not a mechanistic machine-like, pull apart away from another part kind of universe. Now we thought that way. I say we. I'm saying
Mm.
humanity. We thought that way for a while as the age of enlightenment and science and reasoning came into being when we had Darwin and Descartes and other folks, Newton, like that. It's because it was just their worldview, and we've inherited that. And we were thinking that the world was kind of mechanistic and put together by parts, and that it could be reduced. It could be a reductionistic thing. And what scientists, even scientists who aren't, who have no interest in theology, what they kept discovering and what they continue to discover is no, that's not the case. It's not so much that you can find a building block. It's more now that the building block is the relationship between
Mm.
everything. And this is true at a macro level, the largest things we can think of. And it's certainly true at a micro level. I mean, you think about things like quantum physics. And it's just nuts, the way that we are entangled in ways that we had no idea. And so I think it's true to say, like, we're not even sure where I begin and you end, and where you begin and I end. And now this is just a little bit different than desire, because that obviously, that idea with Gerard, carries some weight too, because of his interest in how our desires affect each other. But this is saying in biological ways, in ecological ways, in physical ways, we are deeply interconnected. So if you take that as the nature of reality is telling us that everything is relational, well, that opens up all kinds of very interesting things. What open and relational theology does is it's committed to saying that that's also true about the divine. That's not just like this separate thing that's true about us and that God lives somewhere else, but that God, whatever God is, he, she, it, is deeply entangled with us as well. It's a really beautiful thing. Like Al Whitehead's famous line is, God is not, and also true of us too. Like, we are not the exemption, the exception to this relational thing, but we are an exemplification of this relational thing. So you don't just appear out of nowhere. You come from the world, and the world doesn't appear out of nowhere. It comes from the universe. The universe comes from, I don't know, multiple universes. Eventually, what we imagine is that all that comes from God, and that God is interconnected with all of that too. God just doesn't step out of a void. Nothing steps out of a void. And so the last piece, and there's all these different implications that I'm rushing through in terms of the open part, what that means is that if God truly is in relationship with us, it means that the future has not yet been determined, because for a person to be in authentic relationship with them, there has to be an element of, well, I don't exactly know what's going to happen in the future. Otherwise, they could just control everything and pull some levers and push some buttons, come up with a few algorithms and make it all happen. But that's not, I don't think that's a healthy way to view the divine or a relationship. So we're committed to this idea that God really is in relationship, which means that there's an element of risk and vulnerability and chance, and that's all embedded into love, and that God consents to what we're doing, cares about our choices, that our choices matter. And there's this beautiful interplay between us and the divine and us, and the world all going on all the time at the same time. It doesn't mean that, like, I kind of think, and there's different ideas about this, I kind of think God probably has a good idea about how certain things are going to play out. And there are some patterns that God's probably aware of much more than I am. But I don't think that there is one particular way that a thing has to go. I think there's always options. There's always a choice. It might only be a really small choice, but that God lives in the smallest of places. So that's kind of a real quick overview of open and relational theology. The relational piece opens us up to the open piece, and then back and forth like that.
I love it. Hi, Jose. Good to see you. Michael says the multiverse. That's awesome. I love it. I love it. Well, you've talked about it a little bit. I mean, part of the deconstruction process that people are going through, that you talk about in Theology of Consent very helpfully, is we assume that there is this contradiction between science and religion, science and faith. You talk about science in very interesting, helpful ways, and open and relational theology helps you do that, I think. Can you talk a little bit about that, about science and reconstructing a theology that's not against science, and a science that's not against theology, but how we can work together and see these as cooperative as opposed to competitive or antagonistic?
Yeah. That's a really important part of open and relational theology, the commitment to stick to science as close as to stick to it as close as any scientist would stick to it. And it gives us, once you start to unpack it a little bit, it gives us the flexibility and the design to be able to do that. There's no reason to have to go into this doing what we've basically always done, which is pitting the theists against the atheists.
Mm.
We're really not, they're really, what they're fighting over is this idea of this omnipotent God. So, the atheist rightly pushes back against that and says, no, this isn't what the nature of reality is telling us, that there is something outside of all of this that is making this happen. And to them also, it's like too magical, mythical kind of thinking, and they don't want to go there. And also because, a lot of religious people have done asinine things over the years. So none of us blame the atheist. In fact, I will say this even personally, but I think it's true probably in a communal kind of way. Like, I am personally really thankful for certain atheists, the way they have written, because it helped me deconstruct such a horrible view of God. Like, they got it better than, the religious folks. What tends to happen with the scientific atheist group, as good as all that is then they go the other direction and they begin to try to assign meaning. Now, not all of them do that, and I'm speaking in probably generalities here, so forgive me for any atheists who are checking in, because there's whole branches of conversations to have here. But in many cases, because I think human beings are meaning-making machines, we can't even help ourselves. And so a lot of scientists will go the other way, and they'll wind up, they'll use different language, but they'll talk about the ultimate reality, the ultimate kinds of things, and they'll assign that to any number of things like physics or math, or sometimes they'll just talk about it's just the reality, that exists. And so they're kind of trying to make meaning too. So I don't agree with that. I think that there's still room for love, and that there's still room for the possibility of the divine. But I just don't want to go the theist direction, which says it has to be a divine that has it ordered and figured out and a blueprint, kind of a God. So open and relational thinkers will often find themselves in the crosshairs between both of these things. I mean, you're already getting kicked out of this group, and you're accepting the science, but then ultimately you get kicked out of that group because many of them don't want to go take God seriously or love seriously. So it's a very interesting place to be. But I still think there's a lot of really intelligent and important open and relational thinking out there that will help us stay true to science and bring it into the mix. And it'll help us have a better view of who we think, God might be and who we think people might be. So I've loved that part about it.
Awesome. Princess Dallas Lyle says, so grateful for this chat, learning so much. Holly says, the beautiful commingling of human and divine, co-creating together. Beautiful idea. I don't know if you have a response to that.
Yeah, the beautiful commingling. It's where one begins and what the other ends. I'll tell you what I thought of. It's the idea that, like, if you were to talk to me, you probably really wouldn't get an idea of who I am without knowing my kids. And if you were talking to my kids, you probably wouldn't get the best idea of them without knowing me. There's this entanglement that's going on, that we're constantly interacting and connected in ways we don't even know. And I think that commingling, to use her word, is also going on with the divine. Like, you don't really, what I think is you don't really know God unless you know creation, unless you know people and creation. And, I'm looking outside, it's snowing where I'm at in Colorado right now, and the mountains and the trees. You don't get to know God unless you know some of that stuff. But neither do you get to know that stuff without getting to know God. At least that's what I think. And so there's this beauty in the midst of all that, and all this, interaction and consent and pain, but also joy. It is beautiful. Beauty is a really good word. I love that word.
You have used the phrase, I'm intrigued by this phrase, multiple times. I think that I think.
That's right.
Say a little bit about that. I love it.
Well, that's how I hedge my bets. You know what I mean?
Okay.
Because I don't, we're both Girardian influenced. I mean, you can't really trust what you're thinking at any given day, our desires. I mean, for all I know, I'm being influenced by your really positive vibe and all this positive vibe coming in on the chat. And I just want to say really cool things. So I'm just hedging my bets, man. I could be wrong about all this.
Well, anytime you are talking about God, it's probably a good idea to say, I think
That's
that I think
that's
this.
right. That's true. That's true.
Amber asks a really great, challenging question here. Do you think people having a theology that lacks consent is in any way impacting how the church sees consent in relationships? As we all see the sexual scandals and abuse in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. In a word, yes, I do.
Yeah.
I think that how you see God is how you see people, and how you see people is how you see God. And if you see your God as a God who can do whatever he wants, irrespective, doesn't matter, um, then what will happen eventually? And I know they have good intentions when they move into that arena of thinking. Like they're just trying to cope. They're just trying to figure it out. So I don't
Mhm.
mean that every single person that thinks that is nefarious or evil. I think some of the systems are nefarious and evil, but people themselves probably not. But so what I started to say is, if you have a God who can do whatever he wants, then sooner or later, the godly people, in air quotes,
Mm.
will be able to do whatever they want. That's the way it always plays out. And that's completely antithetical to the spirit of Jesus, to the spirit of love. So 100%, I think we've had a very anemic view of consent. I think it's been a word that's not been dealt with. It's not been venerated like it should. I don't even think, I mean, I barely scratched the surface, and it's in my title. I think there's so much relational power that is contained in this word, and I think it literally could change the church if we actually believed it.
Yeah. Thank you, Amber, for that question.
Yep.
And I wanted to get at, you've kind of been talking around it a little bit. And when we were talking about how uh, what you are bringing forward to us is helpful in understanding the Bible,
Mm.
and helpful in the deconstruction, reconstruction process of biblical stories and other things. And one of the examples that you go to very helpfully and frequently in Theology of Consent is the creation story. I mean, I imagine that this is super, I know it's important for Mimetic Theory, and I would imagine that it's very important for open and relational theology, process theology as well. Can you talk a little bit about the creation story, and
Mhm.
you throw some science in there in the creation
Mhm.
story too, evolution,
Mhm.
all of these kinds of things, very fascinating ways. So can you talk a little bit about the creation story and how what you're doing is helping you understand it in different ways?
Yes, I can. I may not make any sense, but I think by the way, I think I probably write better than I speak. So if I say something that doesn't make any sense, you may just have to pick up the
I
book.
think you're doing a great job, Jonathan, and
Thank you.
everybody else says you're doing great too. So there's some
Thank
mimetic
you.
pressure for you right there.
There
So
you go. Yeah. Yeah, the creation story. So my favorite probably passage, my favorite verse probably in the entire sacred text is Genesis 1:2, and
mm,
it introduces these fabulous, enigmatic, mysterious words in the Hebrew. It's tohu vabohu, and
mhm,
then also tahom. So tohu vabohu is, and if there are any Jewish friends listening, I know I just butchered that. I have a
mm,
Hebrew friend who makes fun of me all the time, so that's okay. But those are typically translated as formless and void, which is part of it, but it's much richer and deeper than that. It's more like chaos. I usually interpret it like chaos and potential. And so what the text actually says is that the Spirit of God, the Ruach, is hovering
mhm,
over, and it's deeply connected. So over may not even be quite. It's like almost within. So, but it's hovering over, which is like the implication is of a mother hen. So it's all this feminine stuff that's coming out. It's really beautiful, and it's fanning, so to speak, the flame of the chaos and the potential that already exists. So in other words, Genesis doesn't actually tell us what American Christianity told me my whole life, which is that, formless and void means things are bad, and then God lived out here, and God had to step in and fix it and order it, and then of course Adam and Eve later on mess it up, and then God had to send Jesus back to die. That's not what it says. There is a way to interpret the scripture as saying that. I mean, I'll grant you that. I just don't think it's the healthiest way. I think the healthiest way to think about it, and it leaves all these implications, but is this idea that in the beginning, there was something already going on. And it's chaos and potential. I'm not saying it was great, but neither am I saying it was morally repugnant or evil. It's just, there's just potential in life. I was given this idea of original sin, that was our origin story. And so for a long time, I've been talking about original blessing, that actually blessing comes before sin. And only recently, and I was going to try to work some of this in the book, but I was already in over my head with too much other stuff, so I couldn't. But it's really only been recently that I think actually it's original potential that leads to blessing, because sin is a part of the equation. It's just down here a little bit further. So yeah, the creation story reveals to us not necessarily that a God created out of nothing, because in a relational cosmos, that doesn't even make sense. There is no nothing. You always have to have something. So God is interconnected with creation. Creation's interconnected with God. And so there's a lot of implications with all that. It means that, among other things, that this chaos and potential may not be a moral or immoral thing. It may be amoral, which, by the way, helped me work through a lot of stuff about sexuality and this idea that it doesn't have to be a binary, thing. Like I was taught growing up, a really well-worn path in teaching this was something along the lines of, hey, everyone, check out how God made, created the world, and he made the sky and the earth, and then he made land and water, and then male and female, like everything was put in these binary frames. It wasn't until I was like probably in my 30s or 40s that I thought one day, like, okay, yeah, he made night and day. That's another one I didn't say. But what about twilight?
Yes.
What about the morning time? Or he made land and water. Yeah, but what about the estuaries and the marshlands? And my wife made a really interesting comment a couple years ago, and she said, not only that, but what about the changing sea levels, which then speaks to the fluctuation. It speaks to how things are different, over different periods of time. If you take all of that thinking and you superimpose it or embed it into our thoughts about sexuality, all these lights go on, like, oh yeah, of course we don't think God's not in twilight or God's not in the marshlands. God is omnipresent. He's with us everywhere. And so it is with our sexuality too. We each of us have a variety of different things going on inside of us, but the divine is there. So I get all of that from, and more, much more. I didn't even say it that well, from Genesis 1-2. Like if you just stopped there and you really took that seriously, it would literally, I think because in my life, it literally has deconstructed all of this hierarchical, omnipotent, loving obsession with God having to step outside of time and space and fix us. It's a really, really beautiful thing.
Yeah, I've always been taught, I think, that it's chaos. God creates this chaos out of nothing, and then God has to like control it or put it into order it, probably is a better way to put it. But that's not how you view that the creation story, or is it?
It's possible.
Yeah,
because I don't know, but I don't think so. So different open and relational thinkers will go different directions. A problem with what you just said, like, well, God created the chaos, is, well, then also I should say, first of all, it depends on how you define chaos. Normally, the chaos is defined as evil. So then you have to then justify why God would create, something evil. So a lot of that can be alleviated if we just back up and we say, no, chaos isn't necessarily evil. It's just the potential for things, and it just has to be harnessed. It has to be negotiated with. And so I think the divine consents, like there's this consensual relationship with chaos, and it's constantly inviting, the good things that are happening, or the good things that it can see could be happening, and infusing that into this thing we're calling chaos. Yeah. There another way to see it, like process, like Al Whitehead, he was more interested in saying that creativity, which is kind of another way of saying it, is it's not separate from God, but it's a whole another thing that God has to enter in with, and that creativity for him becomes the ultimate. I think there's a way to read for me. There's a way to read this tohu vabohu as being this thing. Whatever else was happening, this thing was already going on when the Hebrew scriptures began to speak about it. So it doesn't have to mean that there was nothing and then all of a sudden there was something, and God. It could mean there was something already going on, and if there was something already going on, well, that's pretty interesting. Opens up a lot of doors.
Right? Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Amber says she's quoting you here. How we see God is how we see people, and how we see people is how we see God. So good. Thank you. I'm a new pastor and I want my congregation to learn this well. I want to learn this well. So thank you. Yeah, just some very, very positive comments on here. So one of the other, and we've got 7 minutes left, so I thought I'd throw this question at you here at the end. One of the other topics that you help us understand better in a theology of consent near the end of your book, appropriately so, is apocalypse. Gerard has helped me understand apocalypse in different ways. He, as you say in the book, can be a little pessimistic about it, but the apocalypse is just this what it means, as you say so hopefully in your book, unveiling. It's an unveiling of who we are, maybe who God is, what the truth about the universe. Could you say a little bit more about apocalypse and how open and relational theology, mimetic theory, has helped you with this big buzzword these days?
Yeah, it's not healthy or helpful to continue to carry all the baggage that Western Christianity has required us to carry with respect to apocalypse. And so it's been pigeonholed into this idea that it means that at some point in the future, there's going to be this violent, ending, this singular thing that God needs to usher in, and that the Prince of Peace, like the first time he rode a donkey, but the next time he's coming in on an F-16 or something, and he's going to destroy the world. It logically it doesn't make any sense, and it forces Christians into this untenable position of not wanting the apocalypse, but really kind of wanting the apocalypse, because then it'll really prove to everyone that God is who he said he was. And it's just a really thin and anemic way to view it. So yeah, apocalypse itself, the Greek word means a revelation. What is the revelation? Well, probably according to the book of the Revelation book, it's that Jesus is giving his life, and he's inviting others to give their life. So the lion looks like a lamb. Lion's only mentioned once. Lamb's mentioned multiple times in the book of Revelation. So that's the revelational thing. The revelational move is this consensual way that Jesus lived, and the consensual relationship that he reflected with Father God. And if we could live that way, first of all, that would be revolutionary and revelationary. Secondly, that would be the thing that would keep us from actually going down the road of a physical, actual, violent apocalypse, which is ironic, right? If we lived by the revelation, if we lived by the apocalypse, we wouldn't have the apocalypse. But of course, we're playing with the definition of those words.
Yeah.
And gosh, that's such an open-ended question, because I'll just say briefly, I did struggle with this a lot, because I do think Gerard is a bit pessimistic, and for reasons I'm not entirely sure still yet. I mean, it didn't help that his last book was my opinion. Who am I? I mean, I'm just a punk trying to figure this out. Gerard is much more intelligent than I'll ever be, but it didn't help that his very last book, you know, he was going deep in with Clausewitz, this, you know, famous war general. How great would it have been if Girard had written his last book about Mother Teresa or Dorothy Day, or, you know, the work you're doing, you know, but he didn't. So I think he gets really caught up in this violent kind of thing sometimes. And so, yeah, in my dissertation, I hesitantly and hopefully humbly critiqued that.
Well, I loved it, and it was you give a hopeful apocalyptic view, a hopeful unveiling
Yeah.
of how we can deal with our problems and reconstruct a better, more healthy theology. And you're doing a beautiful job in your book, Theology of Consent. Here it is. Highly recommend it. And also The Reconstructionist. So highly recommend that one too. So friends, thank you for being here. Jonathan, if people want to keep up with you, follow you on the social media stuff, how can they do that?
Probably the easiest thing to do is go to jonathanfosteronline.com, and you can find out about all the stuff I'm doing there. I podcast some, and hopefully we'll get to write more, and it would be a blast to connect with people there.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for being here, my friend. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for your comments and your questions. And we will do this all again next week, live Thursday at 11 o'clock Pacific. You can keep up with all of the One Questions with Pastor Adam wherever you listen to your podcasts. And hey, if you want to give me a 5-star review. I will not take anything less than a 5-star review on iTunes. So if you could do that, that would be fantastic. But I will, how would I would, you don't have to, because we're all about consent here. So I would just prefer you not give me
it's a consensual podcast.
Right? That's good. Yeah. So
do whatever you want.
That's awesome. All right, friends. Thank you for being here. Hope to see you next week. Until then, God be with you.